It is the most famous silhouette in the world. Ask anyone what the Taj Mahal represents, and you will hear the same story: a grieving emperor, a lost queen, and the ultimate architectural tribute to eternal love. But if you write that in a university history paper, you are missing the point entirely. Framing this complex strictly through the lens of romance obscures the actual mechanisms that allowed it to be built. Strip away the poetry, and the monument becomes something much colder and far more impressive. It's a massive, unyielding data point proving absolute imperial power. To deconstruct this building accurately for your exam, we have to evaluate it along two specific vectors: the geopolitical logistics required to fund and build it, and the architectural syncretism embedded in its design. This mausoleum operates as a 17th-century imperial balance sheet carved into stone, quantifying the apex of the state's wealth and engineering capacity. Emperor Shah Jahan commissioned this complex from a position of absolute autocratic power, commanding one of the wealthiest empires on Earth. By 1632, the Mughal Empire had achieved a rare state of geopolitical equilibrium. Decades of conquest and consolidation had secured its borders and centralized vast sums of tax revenue into the royal treasury. In the early modern world, states weaponized that kind of wealth architecturally. Monumental construction functioned as the primary medium for state propaganda, designed to project permanence and intimidate rivals. A project of this scale requires a perfect storm of stability. You cannot draft tens of thousands of laborers or secure supply lines stretching across a continent while fighting a civil war or managing a famine. Because Shah Jahan enjoyed a massive treasury surplus and relative peace, he could safely divert state funds away from active military campaigns and channel them directly into massive architectural patronage. So, while personal grief provided the initial catalyst for the project, unmatched geopolitical stability was the engine that actually made it possible. Let's establish the foundational timeline. The complex was commissioned in 1632. The main mausoleum was finished in 1648, and the surrounding structures and pardons took another 5 years, completing the site in 1653. Over those 2 decades, the project demanded a sustained mobilization of an estimated 20,000 artisans, engineers, and manual laborers. This was not a standard construction site. The Mughal state had to build an entirely new, sprawling metropolis right next to the site, called Mumtazabad, just to house this immense workforce. That population required sprawling ancillary infrastructure. The state had to establish dedicated agricultural supply lines to feed 20,000 people every single day, backed by a complex bureaucracy to track and distribute their wages. Then there were the environmental challenges. To stabilize millions of tons of stone on the sandy banks of the Yamuna River, engineers sank deep casing wells into the water table, filling them with timber and rubble to create a subterranean support network. When you tabulate the labor, housing, and structural engineering, the Taj Mahal emerges as a supreme feat of state-sponsored infrastructure, operating on a scale comparable to a modern megaproject. This diagram illustrates the next logistical hurdle: materials. The building sits at the center of an expansive Pan-Asian supply chain. The semi-precious stones used for the exterior inlay were sourced across the continent. Lapis lazuli was extracted from the high-altitude mines of Afghanistan and hauled hundreds of miles southeast. Sapphire was imported by sea and land from Sri Lanka, while shipments of raw jade traveled along arduous trade routes all the way from China. But the most physically demanding constraint was the primary building material itself, the brilliant white Makrana marble. Quarried in Rajasthan, thousands of tons of this dense rock had to be dragged over 400 kilometers to Agra. This required a constant convoy of specially reinforced ox-drawn carts and teams of elephants laboring for years. The walls of the monument are effectively physical receipts. Every stone embedded in the structure proves the Mughal Empire's vast geographic reach and immense purchasing power. Now we turn to the second vector: heritage. The design of the Taj Mahal did not suddenly materialize out of a vacuum. To understand its geometry, you have to look at the architectural template established 70 years earlier, Humayun's tomb in Delhi. This structure provided the baseline for royal Mughal mausoleums. It introduced the bulbous Persian dome to the subcontinent and established the charbagh, a strict four-part symmetrical garden representing the Islamic concept of paradise. Notice the primary material. The early Mughals deliberately built with heavy red sandstone. It was an aggressive aesthetic choice that projected military strength while integrating with existing indigenous Indian building traditions. Shah Jahan took this dynastic baseline and executed a massive material upgrade. He favored pristine, formalized aesthetics over military bulk, trading heavy sandstone for luminous white marble. The Taj Mahal functions as the iterative refinement of this established dynastic formula, representing the final evolution of Mughal royal architecture. This process of blending cultures brings us to a vital term for your exam, the Mughal synthesis. Look at the core structural elements. The four massive vaulted archways on each face of the building are known as iwans, a hallmark of Persian Timurid design. Above them sits a brilliant piece of engineering, the double dome. The lower inner shell creates a perfectly proportioned acoustic space for the interior chamber, while the massive outer shell creates a towering, intimidating profile against the skyline. But look directly adjacent to that Persian dome. You will find four smaller, open-air pavilions called chhatris. These are purely indigenous Indian elements, borrowed from Rajput architecture, seamlessly integrated into the roofline. These disparate cultural features are harmonized by anchoring them to a rigidly symmetrical, elevated platform and flanking them with four purely decorative minarets. The structural fusion of imported Islamic geometry with native Indian motifs results in a singular, unified form. When we zoom in from the macro structure to the micro ornamentation, we see a technique called petra dura, or stone inlay. In religious Islamic structures, strict theological principles prohibit the use of figurative art, meaning no depictions of humans or animals. The extensive floral designs serve as a highly complex, permissible workaround. By covering the walls in geometrically perfect vines and flowers, the mausoleum is transformed into an earthly representation of the gardens of paradise. This is framed by massive bands of Arabic calligraphy cut from black marble. The lettering gradually increases in size as it rises up the archways, creating an optical illusion that makes the text appear perfectly uniform from the perspective of a person standing below. And enveloping all of this is the exclusive use of white Makrana marble. Moving away from traditional red sandstone served as a direct ideological statement, projecting absolute purity and the divine right of the emperor. Every curve and inlay is a calculated aesthetic choice. The design carefully balances strict religious obedience with the overwhelming projection of imperial wealth. When we pull back and recombine these vectors, the true nature of the monument comes into focus. History gives us the physical structure, a massive achievement of geopolitical logistics and supply chain management, made possible only by the absolute centralized wealth of the 17th century Mughal state. Heritage gives us the aesthetic design, the terminal apex of the Mughal synthesis, perfectly locking Timurid structural engineering into a framework of Indian motifs. If you want to demonstrate a deep understanding of this subject, leave the romance out of your analysis. Focus instead on how this site functions as an instrument of statecraft. The Taj Mahal remains history's most aesthetically perfect receipt of absolute imperial power.